Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
I am Troy Edgar, and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, I met with DC law partner Sohan Dasgupta at the Prospect House in Washington, D.C. Sohan served as the former Deputy General Counsel at the Department of Homeland Security and as Special Counsel of the U.S. Department of Education. He is currently a partner at Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister, representing clients before the U.S. Supreme Court, appellate and trial courts, government agencies, and Congress. We discussed his work on national security, trade, white-collar litigation, and international disputes. Sohan has written 3 books, and at the age of 28, he participated in the drafting of the Tunisia Constitution of 2014. In this episode, we discuss his incredible journey from India to America, his education, and how he uses his multidisciplinary background to solve tough client issues. We also talked about the effects of IQ and the meritocracy pillars of competence and effort on success. Lastly, Sohan reminds us how important it is to hold yourself to a higher standard. He said, if you treat yourself with respect, honor, and dignity, you make it possible for others to treat you that way as well. I hope you enjoy. Good evening, Sohan. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Troy. Great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I really appreciate you coming up here to the Prospect House here in Washington, D.C. and being on my show today.
The honor is all mine.
I'm really honored to have you on my show. You know, you and I have probably known each other for about 3 or 4 years, and we had served together at DHS. That was our kind of crossover point. But I think the interesting part with you and I is, you know, we were very specialized in what we brought to government at that time. And then when government was over for us and we had done our time, we took ourselves back into our professions. You know, you now back here at in Washington, D.C. at a very prestigious law firm and focusing on national security and trade, white-collar litigation, and, you know, international disputes. And as we kind of keep crossing our paths here in D.C., you know, a lot of people tell me, hey, Troy, the law stuff that you do is fairly interesting. And I would have to say, Sohan, that what you do is very interesting to me. And I'm just looking forward to sharing this with the listeners and letting them have kind of an idea, an insight of somebody that just a very interesting background. And from a meritocracy perspective, you know, really utilizing the credentialing process that you've used in your life, and then kind of after you achieved it, you moved on and didn't never look back. You just kind of kept using that process and using it as kind of the credibility to do things to the next level. So anyway, what I'd like to do, if it would be okay, is I'd like to have you maybe introduce yourself to the listeners and to give a little bit of a perspective of your background and what gets you here, here in Washington, D.C.
That's very kind, Troy. You are beyond gracious, and your friendship is a blessing in my life. You know, I think it's tremendously important to appreciate first and foremost that, you know, I consider myself a very ordinary person who has been blessed to meet extraordinary people like yourself, like many of our friends, and it has been a true honor, a source of gratitude in my life. And I stand very much on the shoulders of giant sacrifices and contributions others have made, and I find myself tremendously humbled by that, and to be called upon to do my best to vindicate and acquit their trust and faith in me.
Yeah, that's interesting. With you going through your process, like I said, you know, you've achieved great things, but I think Maybe just a little bit from your origin story of being able to get back into, where were you born and how did you end up here?
Thank you very much. I was born in Calcutta, India, and which was the second city in the British Empire once upon a time. And by the time I was born in 1985, all of that was in the antediluvian past almost. And there was a tremendous cultural and national churning happening in India at that point in time. Because India was undergoing a period in its own national journey where it was part of the non-aligned movement. Liberalization had not occurred yet. It would occur 6 years after I was born. And in the larger geopolitical scheme, the Berlin Wall still had not fallen. The Cold War was at its peak. And that was the firmament into which I came.
Yeah, seeing that, I mean, at an early age, you may not have been fully aware of that, but I would think that families that get to a certain point and they kind of move on, there's also kind of the ideals of what kind of makes up and the values that make up you and your family. And I would just tell you as your friend, outside of everything else, is that like you're a very principled guy. I can tell, your demeanor, the way you carry yourself. You can tell that you definitely early on in your career, early on in your life, you had some probably pretty important experiences that have made you, the person you are today.
I think that it's very important to appreciate the values, the value system, the value ecosystem, perhaps, that make us who we are. And in that regard, I fully credit my family, my grandmother, and my parents, my grandparents, everybody, and the people I grew up with for whatever has become of me. So some of the attributes that I was brought up with was a profound sense of duty that was inculcated within us from an early age, duty and honor, patriotism, diligence, virtue, courage, loyalty, service. Fidelity was very important. What sometimes is called moral courage and being a wartime conciliary when it actually counts. It's very easy to be an armchair friend or an armchair patriot or armchair anything. When rubber really hits the road, how we behave, that is truly telling and emblematic of our character. Another concept that was inculcated into me was the fact that it's important to have pure relationships with people, not transactional relationships, pure relationships that are animated, driven by noble and as far as my grandmother tried to teach us, elevated sentiments. And I've never been a transactional person in my personal relationships. My grandmother and other people saw to it that I wasn't brought up that way. And that's something of paramount importance to me. In terms of duty, I think that one of the real moments of epiphany, I can't call it a Damascus moment because I don't think I was ever contrary to this, but a real moment of epiphany was being at DHS, being at Homeland Security, and this must have been my second or third day, and seeing a Coast Guard officer in uniform on the St. Elizabeth campus. And it just kind of, that drove the point home to me that I was a lawyer for our brave women and servicemen in uniform. That elicited in me a deep sense of duty. It must have been there, and it should be there for every lawyer serving the United States government and every person serving. But for it to be so palpable, so tangible, so real, that made quite the impact on me, and I've not forgotten it. One of the proudest moments of my career has been sitting behind one of our service persons in uniform when they were testifying before Congress or subcommittee of Congress. So those are the things we carry with ourselves. So, among the things that I've learned and been brought up with is the respect for dignity of labor and traditions, traditional values, respect for one's country, one's friends, one's family, one's posterity, one's ancestors, respect for the institutions and the world around us, respect for truth and honesty, respect for service, which you have rendered so magnificently well, and you continue to effloresce with, and honor and devotion, unity and respect. Those are the principles that I was raised with, and from an early age, I've had the great privilege of mixing with all kinds of people throughout my life. The environments and the nurturing that I have received have been very productive in that sense. So the people I have met have really touched my heart. And I have witnessed that there's, among other things, no correlation between one's bank balance and one's generosity and magnanimity of the heart.
That's a very good point. I agree with you there.
And it's not a negative correlation. It's not a positive correlation. And if I may make one final point, it's that, the way my grandmother and other people in my life have tried to bring me up is that we have a duty in the world to be respectful of everyone, especially of those who cannot answer back to us and those who need our affirmation in some way. So no matter who we are in the world, Troy, there are those whom we can help and can help constructively, productively, significantly. And so, even if you happen to feel that you are undergoing some hardship or some adversity yourself, an element of poignant role reversal, Troy, will reveal that you hold the power, even in your weakest moment, to lift others up, give them the affirmation and the validation that they need. Sometimes it's through words, sometimes it's through a different kind of encouragement. So regardless of one's own circumstances, the least one can do when the moment is right is to do so. In many ways, one can treat others better than one has oneself been treated. And therein perhaps lies one's vindication, one's tribute to oneself, one's realizing and unlocking the ultimate timeless providential gift. And that's sort of the view that was brought into my life from a very early age.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the discussion and your thoughts about your grandmother. I was going to pull privilege if you didn't, because how special she's been, and you've always made that clear. Within the confines of the podcast, a big part that the listeners are kind of interested too is you kind of establish yourself, because all of this background will make a lot of sense when we get to the things that you're actually focused on. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about your educational background. And just to kind of summarize it, because you're a very humble man, so I'm going to do a little bit of this for you, is, you've got, your BA from Columbia, you've got a master's in science from Oxford, you went to Cambridge, got a Ph.D., and I've never heard anybody call you a doctor, by the way, a sign of your humbleness. And then you went to law school at Berkeley. And the question that I have for you is that, at a very young age, here you are, your family, it goes through a transition, and you don't miss a beat. You kind of keep focused with like a focus and a purpose that kind of ends up after, your education, you get into, you actually get the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor. And I was just kind of curious, like being able to kind of work through your education part to get yourself credentialed. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe your choices?
That's very gracious, Troy. I hope I'm, even a small fraction, in deserving the generous and munificent bequest you've just given me. So, I'm extremely grateful to this country for the opportunities that have come my way. I always like to say that America is a dream. It's a city on the hill. To us, America has always been a place of meritocracy, which is part of the name of your podcast. It's a place of virtue, honor, opportunity, justice, idealism. America is a slice of geography, to be sure, but it's also a concept of the highest order, the noblest idea, the noblest ideal. And I've been blessed with all the bestowals that have come my way due to, as I mentioned earlier, the sacrifices and contributions of others, my family and other people in this country. So it's very important, I think, to have a certain amount of humility, thoughtfulness, and gratitude. And, this cannot be faux humility, because I really sincerely believe this. And I think that the opportunities that have come my way have been because of what others have given me. So when I was growing up in the final years of my adolescence in this country, I was very fortunate to have been admitted to Columbia University to pursue my undergraduate education. And there I met such wonderful people who taught me many of the virtues that I recounted earlier, the qualities that one tries very hard to live up to. They're such impressive people that I met, and many of them remain lifelong friends. And so my undergraduate education was at Columbia. And then after that, I received the opportunity to go to the University of Oxford, where I pursued my master's. And my thesis was on property rights. I was very interested in the idea of economics, economic liberty, how that interacts with law, how that undergirds so much of the legal infrastructure. And then I went to the University of Cambridge. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And so it was only natural to want to pursue a Ph.D. in law. And I was extraordinarily fortunate. And I remain very, very grateful, infinitely grateful, that the opportunity to do so came my way. When you're at that age, when you're 21, 22, you might not fully appreciate how rare some of these opportunities are, and how fortunate, how lucky you are to get the rarefied opportunity to study them, among the spires of Oxford or the fens around Cambridge. And now when I go back to England or interact with fellow alumni of Oxford and Cambridge here, or of Columbia or of Berkeley, one appreciates, and I find it very comforting. It's not in any way condescending. I find it very comforting that I am a tiny drop of water in a far grander ocean. That there have been people for 800 years in the case of Cambridge, 800 plus, just over. I was there for the 8th century celebration at Cambridge, and 900 years at Oxford, who have achieved so much more than I could ever dream of. And the composite, the mosaic, the melange of their achievements are truly impressive and exemplary, and in many ways unfathomable. And one is honored, and one finds it extremely reassuring to be a tiny and minuscule part of that far wider and grander composite. And then I was fortunate to go to University of California at Berkeley for law school. When I did that, I met extraordinary people, amazing people. I met excellent professors, and that opportunity permitted me to clerk for two extraordinary human beings who were my judges. Judge Consuelo Callahan on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and Judge David Faber on the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of West Virginia. And they remain stellar and sterling mentors and well-wishers, and tremendously inspiring people because of their sense of duty, their sense of honor, their sense of trying to do their very best as judges, and appreciating that a lot of people look up to them, that there's a dignity and decorum with which they have to and do conduct themselves. So I've learned a lot from the people in my life.
So when you got done with your education, and you start getting into your career, I think two or three things that I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about. I have this this dream of authoring books at some point when I actually find time doing nothing, which may never happen then. But you've been the author of 3 books. And I think also the other part about your career that I thought was interesting when we've been talking through this was that you participated in drafting the Tunisian Constitution, which, very few of my friends have put together constitutions in a joking way. I'm saying this, but just very impressive. And then, obviously through all of your different experiences and where we kind of come together at Homeland Security. But could you talk about just a skim top of the books, the process that you went through at a very young age of helping form a constitution for a country that was really at a point in time needed that type of a help?
Oh, that's very gracious of you to bring it up, Troy. I think you mentioned, and I will get into all of this. I think you mentioned something about the Congressional Gold Medal.
Yes.
Right. And the Congressional Gold Medal, it's something for young people, and it's a way to encourage young people to strive for goals that fit within the parameters and expectations. And I was very fortunate to, I think, start with something else and then go up to bronze, then silver and gold. And I think it's wonderful. I know that Britain has Duke of Edinburgh's prizes, awards for young people. We have this here, and I think it was very beneficial to me. With regard to my books, I mean, the first book, my grandmother had encouraged me to write it, and I was only 18 or so when I started on that. Then that took root, and I believe I dedicated that book to my grandparents, if memory serves me right. And it was a young person's idealized vision of the world and of the law and so on and so forth. A lifetime has gone by since then, right. But perhaps there was something worthy or valuable there. You brought up the Tunisian Constitution. At the University of Cambridge, there was a group called the Wilberforce Society, and I was involved with them, and they were my friends. And so, the Arab Spring had just happened. There were a lot of activity in North Africa. I'd been to North Africa. I found it a very stimulating part of the world. There was a real crossroads environment there. It was Carrefour, as the French like to say. You had Arabic culture, then you had French influence, you had British influence in Egypt, French influence in Morocco and Tunisia, and so on and so forth. So that was a very interesting time, and that's when we worked on the potential draft constitution of Tunisia. The third book, the monograph, that came about on account of my Ph.D. So I had worked on what is essentially a book on international disputes, public international law. It was a study of international arbitration, international human rights, and international trade, the GATT, WTO tribunals. On one hand, international human rights and international investor-state dispute settlement. And they were all trying to respect, vindicate property rights, but at the same time, how they did it in different ways because of their institutional and pragmatic priorities, not to mention different textual commands in the various legal instruments. That was of great interest to me, and that's how it came about.
When you and I first kind of came together, and this is probably the career part where we intercept, is, you were the Deputy General Counsel at Homeland Security. You and I were both political appointees in there. But I knew, though, before you got in DHS, you had done some other work within the administration. And could you talk a little bit about, the opportunity to do this and then some of your journey to where then you and I came together?
Mm-hmm. I was special counsel at the U.S. Department of Education, and very interesting work was happening there. And that was an opportunity to learn about how the regulatory process worked, how agencies worked, how they worked internally, how they worked with the White House, with OMB, with OIRA, and so on and so forth. And I look back on that time in my life with a lot of respect for the people I served with, both politicals and others, and affection for the people I was there, and things I was able to learn, and hopefully I was able to add some value. And then I moved on to DHS as Deputy General Counsel, and that was another extraordinary time in one's life.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I think what was interesting, the way you approach stuff, and maybe because of your background, a little bit of the takeaway that I had from you from our first interaction was like we were caught up in some sort of a thing, which is an everyday occurrence when we were at DHS. But and I remember like the thing that I appreciate about you, and maybe this is the attributes of a good lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so I would just put it out there, and you could critique me here in a moment, but. A little bit of a color commentary to lead up to what I'm about to say is any job that I've done in my career, I know what my main job is, but I find out what the process is around it and I prosecute it. And I figure out what the boundaries are and the rules. I figure out how far can I go, both in procedure and in relationships. And very respectfully, I push it. And I did that, my corporate career, my 12 years in the council and being a mayor of a city. The one thing that people knew is I came prepared. I knew what even though I'm not a lawyer, I read all the policy and laws that are associated with any topic. And since I would be super prepared, it was in debates or questions of policy, I felt like I want to hear what everybody has to say, but I definitely have a perspective and I have 2 or 3 moves to get there. And when I encountered you, we were on some sort of an issue and I remember getting a call from General Counsel, which is never something that you really hope for every day. There was a lot of different calls. And I would say in my job as CFO, there was a couple processes that I had to get down. And by the way, now I'm at IBM and I'm a partner and I run a part of their federal business. I feel like my value to IBM to some extent is I know the processes. I know what it means for appropriations. I know how to deal with OMB because the White House would kind of direct stuff either indirectly politically through the secretary or they would send policy directives or hold back monies from OMB. And then, I also learned the ledge process. So at the CFO of Homeland Security, if you look at it, the dealing with Congress is broken up into 2 parts at DHS, the Office of Legislative Affairs, and they deal with the authorizers, so the policy people, and the CFO shop that deals with the appropriators. What I would really try to understand is I wanted to know how the appropriations worked. I wanted to know the 4 corners of Congress, Senate, and House for chair and ranking, so that if I needed to help the administration get policy funded, I can do that. Your background, it's going to go into our discussion about what you do and some of these unbelievable things that you're doing in your non-government capacity now. It's I was always admiring your mindset as you frame stuff up, and I almost felt like once I could get into your channel and figure out the process, I didn't know law, but I could tell the discipline process, and I was just kind of curious. That's something that I think seems to have served you really well. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. And you have been a great leader for our country, and you've been a great leader at IBM. So, the credit really goes to you. I think that some of the things that you mentioned engendered a couple of thoughts in me. One is that most of the time, preparation and diligence beats everything else. I can't tell you how many times I see this. You'll have a few people competing for something, and somebody has a 99.9 percentile IQ and hasn't worked very hard, and latterly others have. And so often, the person who has put in the work and is reasonably competent will beat the person who's supremely intelligent, supremely competent, but hasn't put in the work. So that's very important. And at the end of the day, what matters is the effort we put in and the results we achieve, because that is a reflection of character, of heart, and of outcomes. And so that's very important. And another broader point that I think bears mention is that I have always found it helpful to try to make complex things simple. Many things are esoteric, arcane, recondite, abstruse, and something that I've heard said is that it's not genius to put a $2 idea into a $20 sentence. It is genius, the opposite, the diametrical opposite, to put a $20 idea in a $2 sentence. Mm-hmm. Make it as simple as possible. And I recall when I was at various phases in my career, mentors have said to me that simplicity is elegance. Mm-hmm. And that notion has really stayed with me, because much of what we do in government, much of what we do now in the private sector, they're complex things, but you can distill them onto a landscape and a framework and an architecture which need not be at its core as complex as all that. You might be able to find a few templates, permutations for them that assist in making it accessible and understandable to other people. So that has generally been my approach. And at Homeland, my portfolio concerned various things. And in government, I worked on litigation, oversight, FOIA. Now, so much of the work I do pertain to sanctions, export controls, CFIUS, matters in litigation, both trial and appellate. And I think it's important. I mean, some of the skill sets are different. There's not always an overlap, but I find all of it quite interesting and quite fascinating. The white collar investigations, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit. But at the end of the day, you're trying to understand what the problem is, and if you have the ability and the interest and are driven to do so, you're trying to help a person. I think that help your client, help the people in your environment, the other lawyers, the business people that you work with, other entities that you work with. It's very important to there was an era in the culture of the legal profession, and that is much less common now than it used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago, where attorneys would really think of themselves as versatile, all-purpose counselors at law. So solo practitioners, small firms in the country, they would approach things like that. So there was the distinction between litigator and transactional lawyer, barrister, solicitor, all that was much more collapsible, and there was a great deal more fluidity in that. So.
Can I ask you a question? So
Yes, sir.
when we got done within our public service, there's a part of me that's, you wake up every day and you just feel like, forget whatever side of the politics people are on. It's you're serving the country, definitely making a lot less than what we would be making if we were out in the doing our normal occupation at the time. So it definitely for us was not about money, but that experience, the people we met, the people we work with, the people we still see, pretty incredible. And, and it's funny is when you're doing that, I always marvel, and I talk about this on my show and I get other people that I've served with at DHS, but, there was so much stuff going on at DHS that, you could see news being made before it's made, and you kind of had to learn to temper yourself and stay focused and not get caught up in that. I was just kind of curious before we move off of this and get into your career portion. The question is, did you find it hard to separate between the noise and the rocks, the big ones that had to be moved? And because, just from your perspective.
Troy, I think that in your capacity or mine, we had no choice but to be either intrinsically be or to very quickly learn to separate the truly high priority items from the less imminent items. So, I fully agree with you. I think that kind of prioritizing and remaining unflappable while doing it just sort of, you're in that environment, you're in that ecosystem. So you either already have the capability of doing that, but you will learn so quickly to do that because you literally have millions of things being thrown at you. You're in a high pressure, highly volatile environment. There's a lot happening. It's in the national security space. It's part of it. Our agency was in the intelligence community, and so you appreciate that you've got to remain poised, unflappable, dignified, and show operational leadership. And a word that you mentioned is entirely appropriate, which is multidisciplinary. In the skill sets, you're managing people as well as you're managing numbers. And in my case, I was addressing legal issues. and working with people, right? So you have people above you, people at your level, people who report to you, and a lot of people who are kind of veined in to the org chart, who are in and around you. They either directly report to you or they have some kind of an indirect accountability to you, right? And there are thousands of issues happening all the time. Neither of us could have seen that much of the work we would be doing would pertain to COVID and COVID-related issues, right? And that happens, and one just has to rise to the challenge, rise to the occasion, and do the best one can. And at the end of the day, what I learned from the people in my life, people like yourself, other people that you mentioned, is it's about duty, it's about service, it's about honor, it's about trying to do one's level best for one's nation. So.
Yeah, no, I thought that was great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the pivot. So it's time to go home, right? It's time to go back and join our professions. And so, I obviously left and went to IBM. A lot of the things that you and I talk about and some of the stuff that you share in getting involved with, I think will be very interesting to our listeners. It's with your education, your interdisciplinary approach to things, whether you're dealing with international advising, it's funny as I follow you too, and a lot of things that you do, and I'll be talking to you, and you're like, "Hey, I'm briefing Congress. Hey, I'm receiving the Egyptian ambassador," and I'm not name dropping or throwing stuff out there. It's that is your job, right? I mean, those are things that you kind of come across. And it's not because you're, the best guy to have a beer with or tea, which you are, but it really, that's your professional function. And could you paint a little bit about your role? You've highlighted it: national security and litigation, white collar crime, and international disputes. But here's a guy that has put together a constitution. You've served the country at the highest level. You have written books. Now you're kind of at full steam as a litigation expert in your field. And it'd be interesting to the listeners just to give an idea of how this is going at Taft and what you're doing there.
So when we left government, eventually I ended up at Taft. I'm fortunate to be a partner there. It's an exciting and stellar place with remarkable lawyers, and I'm very honored and privileged to work with all of them. And there, I've found throughout my career and throughout my endeavors, I have found that it helps to focus both on the problem-solving strategies and to appreciate that, the endeavor in which I'm involved is about helping a client. It's about helping a person. It's about fixing some problem rather than tickling my own ego. That has helped me enormously not to miss the forest for the trees or behave in a manner that somehow was counterproductive. So that has been very helpful to me. Also appreciating that, you've got to respect people, you've got to respect their individual dignity, you have to show enough empathy, you have to show a great deal of empathy. You have to have a certain amount of profundity of character, understanding, put yourself in other people's shoes and their positions, whether it's a client or it's a fellow attorney, whether it's even opposing counsel. It's very important to do that. And you mentioned very, very kindly my work in the international space. I'm very grateful to the people who have been so kind as to involve me in that world, to talk to parliamentarians, prime ministers, and really world leaders on issues concerning trade, national security, international cooperation, some of the specific issues that I've worked on, and learning as well as teaching. You've got to listen as well as speak to the community of nations on issues of importance to them. And something you'd mentioned earlier, Troy, about the international education and dimensions. People I had met from that phase of my life many of them are doing things similar to, in other countries, they're doing things similar to what I'm doing now. So often we compare notes, and we've even had kind of briefings where they can teach us things and we can teach them things. They have questions, and we've had on many of the trade and national security issues. So all of that comes full circle. And I've been invited by members of parliaments in the UK and in Latin America, Parlatino, Romania, Hungary, the European Parliament, and Guatemala, and these intelligence summits that happen in Congress. There's a wonderful organization that does that. As people often have said, the biggest risk in life is not taking risk.
That's right.
And so when I had the opportunity way back in the day to avail myself of one of these invitations, and I did that, it just opened up a whole wonderful world to me. And I've been very fortunate about the people I've met, what they have taught me, the relationships I've developed, and the graciousness, the kindness they've shown me. And I try to remember, it's very important in life to be grateful to people, to be loyal to people who have given of themselves to you, who have helped you. That is of paramount importance to me in my life, to show appropriate fidelity and loyalty to people who have been so gracious and stellar and generous to me. And that's how I have tried to behave myself, and I hope I always will.
It's interesting, Sohan. So to claim ground, my vision for this podcast is that somebody that is somewhere in their career and they're trying to find different paths, each episode kind of has a piece that kind of gets put together as somebody's interested in international law in any part. So what I hope to be able to do is to kind of create something that people will be able to use as a reference library and be able to kind of go through and get something, very special for them and hear the stories. But my point to you, so I'm kind of in the same vein as, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was in Stockholm, Sweden for NATO. And I was up on stage, and the Secretary General's there, the Minister of Defense for Sweden. There's a lot of, pretty powerful people in the room. And when we talk about meritocracy, you've got to achieve credibility at each step to be able to be credible there. The example that I used when I was interviewing some folks in Sweden was, to be a global leader, you had to be a leader in a specific area. Then you had to be like the leader in the West Coast. Then you had to be the leader in the Western United States. Then you're a North American leader, and then you're a global leader. And then once you get to that stage, you start meeting other global leaders, to use your example, and you start trading information. But to be able to trade information, you got to have information to trade. And so I think what I like about your story of where you've been able to get to, and what I hope that the listeners will get out of this, is that, it isn't like you just wake up today and you had an opportunity to go speak to the Hungarian parliament. I remember talking about that. You had to be credible enough to even get the invitation. And what I hope to be able to do is that you through your help in this process and all the people that have been on this podcast, we inspire people to look at the way America is set up. I mean, like you said, the greatest place in the world. And, without excuses, without having to be put into different categories, you just put your head down and you do what you need to do. And I think that that's something that's very powerful. And I think your testimony is something that I hope people that are out there that want to get to certain levels, I'm trying to provide a blueprint through this process. The one thing I was going to ask you, look back, what would be your reaction to that, to getting up on the global stage and kind of, you almost got to claim some ground, right? You've got to look around and really appreciate and not take it for granted.
Absolutely, Troy. There's no substitute for hard work. And very early in my educational journey, someone said to me that, and this person was he's no longer with us, but he had said something that has stuck with me. He said that make sure that before you want to do international this or international that or whatever, you are the master of whatever domain that you claim to be. When you're fighting for your client, when you're before a court, when you're before some tribunal or anything like that, you have to be the best craftsman or craftsperson that you can be. There's no substitute for that. You can't say that, I'm good at all these other things which have tertiary relevance or bearing in my life. And so, please cut me some slack here. And you can't do that. You've got to be the best, and then and only then, as you say, in order to trade information, you've got to have information. You've got to have that expertise. And there's no substitute for hard work. And if I may,
Please.
It ties into some other things that are important in terms of merit, that are important in terms of the value system that we want to have and we want to encourage young people to have, and all people to have, in terms of service, in terms of duty, in terms of talent, in terms of hard work, diligence. And I think it's very important that we have our focus on those meritocratic virtues. We have our focus on how to generate civility, lives of dignity and respect, prosperity, safety, and above all, I want everyone to know, true loyalty, true friendship, true love, true relationships, something that is genuine, sincere, affirming. I want them to have the blessing, and I wish it were not as rare as it is, of sharing joyous moments with their loved ones, and having authentic loved ones want to be there to share their most painful moments with them. When they are let down by others, I want them to understand the pain of others they might also have let down. When they are treated unjustly, I want them to have the appreciation of justice, the importance of justice. And these are not original thoughts. Others have said it, but I think it's worth repeating. And when they're treated with vilification and calumny, I want them to appreciate the value of respect. When they are lonely, I want them to cherish those who want to give them affection, even if it's not in ways not immediately resonant. I want them to have empathy and a pool of solace. And, merit and talent, they are words, but it is these values that make it into a language and give it currency and give it meaning. And that's on a micro individual level. I've said this before, and I think it bears mentioning here, that I'm focused on, whether it be through rule of law or through policies and practices and customs, on establishing a measure of long-term stability, security, and prosperity of the United States and the free world. Fundamentally, the free world has to engage in greater cooperation, exchange of ideas, intelligence sharing, in order to confront the gravest issues facing all of us. We are going to sink or swim together. Our governments, organizations, businesses, peoples, really, have an immense amount to impart to one another, sharing ideas and intelligence and devising effective reforms. And ordinarily, the best relationship among societies and nations is that which exists among their people. And such exchanges also reinforce trust in each other and faith in our institutions. There's a greater point here, and it deserves, Troy, to be elucidated, that, as I've said before, and as others have noted, by preserving the free world, we safeguard freedom. We safeguard the rule of law. We safeguard merit. We safeguard talent. We safeguard civilization itself. We safeguard truth and justice. And it's remarkable that those who wish to do harm to the free world, they are threatened by the free world's and the United States' perennial quest for truth, which sets us apart and elevates us to more than just a sum of our distinct parts, Troy. And that quest, through success in industry, commerce, and enterprises, cannot have its day without the rule of law and security. And that's why the sort of transnational cooperation to preserve the free world that we're talking about is so crucial. So if there is anything that people who are listening to this podcast so graciously and generously can take away, it's that we need to keep talking to each other and working on ourselves and each other in terms of being the best that we can be. As someone quite notable has said, try to do well today so you can do good tomorrow. You know, it's important to do good. It's important to work with each other and defend the quest for truth, the emblem, the article of faith, our commitment, and eventually the success. But before you can do good, to the point you were making earlier, and you really encapsulated it so well, we must do well today. I remember, and I will close with this,
Please.
The sort of lessons that, you mentioned my grandmother, that she tried to impart to us. And I think that this perhaps is emblematic. She was a wonderful person who led a deeply moral life through example. She was a woman of resoluteness, fortitude, conviction, intellect, courage, all of that. And her efforts on behalf of underprivileged people and sufferers truly touched all our hearts and minds. She knew how to give of herself genuinely, vulnerably, and completely. That required not just courage, but also ceaseless moral imagination. It can't be that she did not ever fear anything, but fear or adversity could never force her to succumb. And that's an element of choice and strength of character. And she would work hard to not yield to fear. And she really impressed the value of hard work and talent and merit. The cultural inheritance that I find, we go to a museum, right? You look at Tintoretto, Van Dyck, Rubens, Gainsborough, all the masters and their paintings. This morning I was reading bits and pieces of Sophocles, and I thought about my grandmother. And, Euripides, one of my favorite quotes is from Phoenicia, right? Justice needs no subtle sophistries, for it in itself hath fitness, but injustice being rotten at the heart needs cunning treatment. I mean, that's so pervasive. But, you can't have the big picture unless you focus on the here and the now. And that just means diligence, hard work, treating people with respect, treating people with honor and dignity, and treating yourself like that. Mm-hmm. Somebody once mentioned in my presence that if you treat yourself with respect, you make it possible for others to treat you that way as well. Mm-hmm. And I have been tremendously blessed in my life to work with people like you and others who have treated me with respect. And I hope to be worthy of the trust and generosity that you all have extended to me.
Yeah. Sohan, I would say, first of all, thank you for sharing your journey. I guess I'm going to close on a little bit of what you said about your grandmother as a father of three. When you hear stories like that, you realize the importance of parents and being a good parent. And I think, that's something too that I think, is really important to America and the structure of the family. And I think that, that responsibility, I mean, think about someone like yourself with all of the thoughts that you've had, and you hold that person up, and, it's a blessing. It's a blessing. It's totally a blessing. And so I think too,
it's a kind of immortality that they've got,
yes.
that you've got, you will, the amazing things you're teaching your children.
I think the hard part, Sohan, is like sometimes when you're in the thick of the pursuit of life and we're fighting, for the good of the country, we're fighting for the good of our career, we're fighting for our spirituality and our relationships. Your discussion today is humbling to me. It reminds me of how important it is to really be an example and to have that type of an effect, and then look at the byproduct of what you've achieved. I think it's just something that was really awesome for us to be able to kind of go through. And I know that wasn't the theme of our show, but I think as I got to the end and like I said, I've been blessed to be able to have discussions with you outside. I really got to know you a lot better, Sohan, through this process. I really appreciate it.
You're an example to us all of how to be, Troy, and I'm honored to have spent this time with you and interfacing with your legions of admirers and listeners in this most moving manner. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I hope you have a great evening tonight, and thank you, and you take care of yourself. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.